Okay, Byfield, and this is your Artspeaks studio moment here from your Artspeaks studio in Dallas, Texas. We offer online classes and in-person classes, particularly to watercolorists. Today we're going to talk about why the elements of design are so critical as you plan and design your painting. When students begin to paint, they think that learning to handle the paint, which of course is challenging in watercolor, is the critical factor to the success of their paintings. But what they don't understand is that whether your painting will be well received or not is determined by the subject matter, the medium that you're using, and how well the painting is designed, just as much as it is in how well the paint is handled. The elements of design are essential to artwork, and we will find typically 3 or 4 in any given piece, but we will not find all of them in any artwork. Artists need to decide which of the elements to use in order to communicate what they're trying to say and create something that's interesting for their audience. The elements of design are line, shape, value, color, texture, and space. Okay, so let's talk about line. Line is two-dimensional. It has length and it has width, and it doesn't have depth because two-dimensional artworks are by definition don't have depth. And because line does not exist in nature, there is no line in nature, artists use line in particular ways to do an artwork. Lines can be straight, lines can have curves, and lines can be very thin or they can be very, very thick. But at some point, the line will become something else. So the question here is that a line or is that a shape? Because it's wide and short, one could argue that it's a shape. Lines, when there are a lot of them, can become texture. So what we see is that all of the elements of design can verge on others. Okay, so let's talk about shape. Shape is when you have a closed area that has length and width of some kind. And you can have very simple shapes. This shape is being created by a contour line. You can have shapes that are more complicated, like this organic shape that again is created by a contour line. Shape can also be created by color or value changes. So when there's a change here between the white paper and the orange color that I've applied, we have created an orange shape. Shape can also be created by texture. So now we have a shape. So shape is, at least in watercolor, one of the most important elements of design because most of our paintings rest on the shapes that we use. When we talk about value, we are talking about the range from the very lightest version of a particular hue or color and the darkest version. So this is gray, and this is called a grayscale. And it tells us that there are 10 steps in this particular grayscale between the lightest version of the color, which is white, and the darkest version of the color, which is black. But there are actually more values. There are infinite number of values. And most people, unless they are impaired in their vision, can see an infinite range of values. But artists typically talk about 10 values or less. Often when they're designing pieces, they use 5. And That helps to make the painting read. Another important element of design is color. And color is the name we give to the mix of electromagnetic waves that bounce off an object. And the name we give the color is called its hue. Color attracts attention, gives pleasure, and gives information about the subject matter of paintings. Here we have pure colors, but colors also come in bright and dull and light and dark. But these are the colors that they're most intense, with the primary and secondary colors and all of the warm and cool variants of those primaries and secondaries. Texture applies to the tactile surface of a work of art. And when we're talking about two-dimensional arts, we're often talking about implied texture rather than actual texture. A contradiction of that statement would be Vincent van Gogh's use of the palette knife, because if you touch his paintings, you actually will feel some texture on that surface. But for watercolorists, we're not building up texture, and so we're applying the look of texture. So it's implied texture, it's virtual texture. And we can do texture by a number of ways. One of the easiest and most common is dry brush, where we take a brush and as it runs out of paint, it just sits on the surface of the paper and therefore creates the look that there is texture. We can also create texture by letting the water do its work. So as the water runs back, or we can create texture by the way we apply the paint. But texture creates interest in a painting, and it also gives information, but we don't typically use actual texture when we're painting. Texture becomes much more important in three-dimensional works where actual texture can be part of the work. Space in a two-dimensional artwork means the illusion of depth in a work of art. So space is the impression that some things are closer to you and other things are farther away. And there are some strategies that artists employ to actually do that, like aerial perspective and linear perspective and size relationships. Space is a critical aspect to some artworks. In other artworks, the piece is flattened and there is no sense of space. You will also see people talking about space in terms of negative space, and that's the space around the subject matter in the painting. I prefer to talk about negative shapes because I think that it's easier to distinguish between space and shape if we do that. So when I talk about space, I'm talking about depth. Okay, to review, the elements of design are line, which has length and width, but no depth. Shape, which encloses an area in some way. Value, which is light to dark in any given color. Color, which is the name of the light rays that are reflected from the surface. Texture, which is the simulation of the tactile sensation of the surface. Or space, which is depth and the illusion of depth on a two-dimensional artwork. Artists use these in order to add interest and communicate the ideas that they're trying to communicate in their artwork. And then in future videos, we'll talk about the principles of organization, how those elements are organized to create a coherent, powerful artwork. Thank you. I hope you'll join us for future Artspeaks studio videos and that you'll consider joining us online or in the studio in one of our classes where we talk about all these things in much greater depth and give you hands-on experience. See you later.